In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I want the truth, so yeah, I will continue to sing. Touch DNA on a knife sheath found. Tiny cells turned everything around. Now all of a sudden they had their man, a PhD student with a master plan. A white car in the neighborhood stopped. Rumors all around, everyone talked. It had to be him, right? The killer who terrorized that night. An eyewitness saw bushy eyebrows on the killer. Suddenly the story was a best-selling thriller. Why didn't the roommate call the law? If a killer in the hallway is what she saw. No DNA from the victims in his car, nor board or apartment at all. But still he is expected to take the fall. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I want the truth, so yeah, I will continue to sin. Touch DNA on a knife she found. Tiny cells turned everything around. Now all of a sudden they had their man, a PhD student with a master plan. A white car in the neighborhood stopped. Rumors all around, everyone talked. It had to be him, right? The killer who terrorized that night. An eyewitness saw bushy eyebrows on the killer. Suddenly the story was a best-selling thriller. Why didn't the roommate call the law? If the killer in the hallway is what she saw, it had to be him, right? The killer who terrorized that night. And no DNA from the victims in his car nor apartment at all. But still he is expected to take the fall. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I want the evidence, so yeah, I continue to sing. If he did it, I hope that he pays. But what if he didn't, what then? I guess maybe the mystery will never end. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So until I get the truth, I will continue to sing. Turned everything around. Now all of a sudden they had their man, a PhD student with a master plan. A white car in the neighborhood stopped. Rumors all around, everyone talked. It had to be him, right? The killer who terrorized that night. An eyewitness saw bushy eyebrows on the killer. Suddenly the story was a best-selling thriller. Why didn't the roommate call the law? If a killer in the hallway is what she saw. No DNA from the victims in his car, nor board or apartment at all. But still he is expected to take the fall. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
This is an article I've spoken to many people about, and some are now having trouble finding it. You used to be able to Google a Business Insider University of Idaho community in chaos after still unexplained killings to find it. Credit to Colleen for finding and sharing it, as it raises many questions, including where the sheath was originally found and what exactly went on that morning. Included is an interview with a neighbor and friend of the surviving roommates, who was called over when things were first discovered, which is reported as hours before police were called. It's a long article and some parts you'll recognize. Listen/read until the very end. There's lots between now and then that you've never heard. But the ending is a shocker. Don't skim quickly. Pause if needed, as there are as many important details that won't jump out at you as will. My notations point out many details, and I provide supporting evidence for information I've received pushback on in the past. You can read those while listening if you prefer. January 17, 2023. Idaho murders, mysteries linger in Moscow weeks after Brian Koberger's arrest. It should be obvious after this article what some of the information being scrubbed pertains to. If it's nothing, why scrub it? Other parts, you'll understand why immediately. After a nearly 7-week manhunt, Brian Koberger's arrest did not reveal a motive. Court documents in the case laying out prosecutors' theory of the crime raised new questions. The long stretch between the killings and when police were called is one outstanding mystery. Moscow, Idaho. As students return for spring semester, the small college town in wheat farming country is still grappling with the killings of 4 vivacious University of Idaho students. A shrine of teddy bears, flowers, and a framed photo collage still stands in front of the 3-story home near campus, where 3 female residents and a male visitor were fatally stabbed in the early morning of November 13th. On Main Street, a table in front of Mad Greek, a restaurant where 2 of the victims worked, holds 4 white candles, each bearing the name of a victim. Madison Mogan, 21, a senior in marketing from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, about a 1.5-hour drive north of Moscow, was remembered for treasuring her friends and dreaming of world travel according to interviews conducted by Insider and reports covered by other outlets. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, was excited for her planned post-graduation move to Austin, Texas, to begin a marketing career. Ethan Chapin, 20, of Conway, Washington, was remembered for his bright smile, sense of humor, as a triplet, a love of playing sports with his siblings. Xana Kernadel, 20, who grew up in Idaho and Arizona, was remembered for loving her independent life in college and for her fierce spirit. A server at Mad Greek, the restaurant where Mogan and Kernadel worked and the other victims visited, wore a ribbon of her school's black and yellow colors to honor her friends. This reflects the university's information given regarding the victims' hometowns. It states Xana is from Post Falls, Idaho. Additional information supports this. The main point being that MPD and U of I reported conflicting information. MPD said Xana was from Arizona, then the Arizona paper. Who knows why? I felt I needed to do a memorial of sorts for each victim before delving into their personal information. Feel free to pause and look over all of the information included, but I'll point out what I took note of. For Kaylee, as we all know, she was cremated. Next, I want to point out Kaylee was born in Concord, California. Both Samantha, her half-sister and SG's first child, and Olivia live in California. Obviously, SG and his family did before moving to Idaho, which made me wonder what the family ties are to California. Olivia lives and/or lived in Los Angeles, which is only about 45 minutes from Concord, and has some ties to Hollywood through her husband. I came across an interesting screenshot about Concord yesterday that I must have taken ages ago. It's some of Neek's Peak's information, which is always good, so I'll share it next. This shows that Concord has a couple of major highways and a major interstate running through it, causing it to play a crucial role in enabling freight and merchandise transport to Canada, which could also be used for rug routes. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, I just saw this yesterday and Concord caught my eye. High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas, HITA program, created by Congress with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, assists federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies operating in areas determined to be critical drug trafficking regions of the United States. This grant program is administered by the Office of National Drug Control Policy. There are currently 33 HITAs, and HITA-designated counties are located in 50 states, as well as in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. The DEA plays a very active role and has more than 1,500 authorized special agent positions dedicated to the program. At the local level, the HITAs are directed and guided by executive boards composed of an equal number of regional federal and non-federal, state, local and tribal, law enforcement leaders. The 2021 national HITA budget was $290 million. Then in 2020, the U.S. designated Kootenai County as part of the Idaho-Oregon HITA. Canadian border. Moscow, Idaho, ports of entry along the U.S.-Canadian border are monitoring for a white 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra that was in the immediate area of the home where 4 University of Idaho students were murdered last month, a Customs and Border Protection spokesperson said. The Moscow Police Department said on Wednesday that they wanted to speak to the occupant or occupants of the vehicle, whom they believe may have a critical information about the quadruple homicide on November 13th. This should clear up any confusion regarding the official interagency BOLO that went out then. It was for a 2011 to 2013 year model. Sounds more and more like there were 2 completely different Elantras out that night, one in Moscow and one in Pullman. Maybe it's normal to continuously monitor a nearby border for a lone perpetrator driving back and forth across it weeks after a quadruple homicide. Or maybe there was an actual investigation into illicit substance connections. We might never know. Next, Maddie Mogan. As we all know, she was also cremated. Then, we have another strange coincidence. Shocker, right? She happened to be born in Eugene, Oregon. She only lived there a couple of years, but it's still a connection. I'd be more comfortable without it. Next, Xana Kernadal. She was also cremated, her ashes are with family. She also has a grave in an unknown location. You can see in her obituary, it states that she grew up in Post Falls, Idaho, and went to middle and high school there until graduation in 2020. I'm not sure where the Arizona native stuff comes from either, since her obituary clearly states she was born at Kootenai Health Hospital. But there the headline is, plain as day, Avondale native among 4 University of Idaho students found deceased. I have no idea why they went so far with this charade. I tend to think the Arizona part is the false part, but I guess I could be wrong. The Post Falls part gives specific details, and I've seen the video clip of her working at the Outback in Post Falls. Of course, that doesn't mean she had a relationship with her mother, unfortunately. I don't understand the lies about such tiny details. You'll come to realize just how many lies have been told about meaningless details of this case. Last, Ethan Chapin. He sounded like someone who made people's lives better just for knowing him. For him, I just want to point out that he did have a service and was buried. He was not cremated. I know many thought all 4 were cremated, so I looked it up to be sure. I checked every paper I could find it mentioned in. No cremation noted anywhere. As you can see, by burial, it says Hawthorne Memorial Park. By burial for the others, it states cremation.
He was their number one, and that's going to be a hard loss for both of our kids. Both Maisie and Hunter. I mean, he was kind of each of their number one. So it's going to be hard just for the 3 of them without him now that they're 2, we've gone from 3 to 2, and it's going to be hard for the 2 kids to figure out how to live life when you've spent 20 years as 3, and now they have to figure out how to be 2 and carry,
So sweet, so friendly, said the young woman, who asked Insider not to use her name. After a nearly 7-week manhunt, questions about what could have motivated someone to harm the students grew even more pitched after the police finally arrested a suspect on December 30th. Despite attempts to make sense of the killings, a motive remains elusive weeks later. And questions have mounted about why one of the surviving roommates waited until just before noon to call police after she'd seen a masked man in her home around 4 a.m. Timing of the 911 call. The police said Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates, heard what she thought was crying around the time of the alleged murders, and a male voice she didn't recognize saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She told authorities that she went to her door and saw a man dressed in black and wearing a ski mask coming toward her and froze, but that after he exited through a back sliding glass door, she locked her own bedroom door and went back to bed. She finally called 911 at 11:58 a.m., after first calling friends over to ask what to do about finding one of her roommates not moving, according to early news reports citing police sources. Then there was the haziness surrounding the grisly discovery. Confusion ensued in the hours before the police were called, said another neighbor, who identified herself as the best friend of one of the surviving roommates and asked not to be named for privacy reasons. She said she came to the house soon after the crime was discovered and learned from the surviving roommates, Mortensen and Bethany Funk, that someone on the 2nd floor wasn't moving. She said she first presumed the person had ingested something from someone that was laced. It wasn't until later that she learned 4 people she knew had been stabbed and were not unconscious, but dead. "When I was out there that day, I wasn't comprehending," she said. "I'm still not."
On Good Morning Northwest, tragedy on the U of I campus. 4 students dead, another in the hospital. The new information we're learning and the questions we're hoping to be answered. On Good Good Morning Northwest, tragedy on the U of I campus. 4 students dead, another in the hospital. The new information we're learning and the questions we're hoping to be answered.
Witnesses tell me that it may have well been preserved because the phone was passed around between one of the fraternity members and the girls. One of them unfortunately witnessed the death, the body there. Can you confirm that?
We cannot actually. We know nothing about that whole phone call. We've asked, and it's, I mean, I know that a lot of people want to know, but that's just not our agenda. We just are like, somebody called 911, somebody was reported unconscious. We don't really know. I mean, we've heard so many different things.
City of Moscow Police Department's post on Facebook. Moscow Homicide Update, November 20th, 2022. Moscow, Idaho. The Moscow Police Department is providing the following information to update the public on the known facts surrounding the 4 murders that occurred on November 13th in Moscow, Idaho. Updated information. Detectives are releasing that on the morning of November 13th, the surviving roommates summoned friends to the residence because they believed one of the second-floor victims had passed out and was not waking up. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call requested aid for an unconscious person. Multiple people talked with the 911 dispatcher before a Moscow police officer arrived at the location. Officers entered the residence and found the 4 victims on the 2nd and 3rd floors.
Called back a lot of media members and answered some questions, but a lot of the details still weren't sorted out. Really, all we got confirmed from that phone call was they are looking for a suspect, and it kind of started and stopped there. There wasn't a whole lot more other than that. I guess we do now know that the unconscious person that they originally responded to is among those 4 that are dead. We did get that confirmed.
What time do you remember the 911 call being? It was at 11:56 a.m. according to police logs, 11:58 a.m. according to newspapers. I've heard this explained as the call being transferred after being answered. I don't doubt 911 was called directly if the call exists. My problem is that it's reported the call was made at 11:58, not that someone spoke to 911 at 11:58. The call was made at and originally connected to 911 at 11:56. Is this a repeat of the 3:01 a.m. banned field call? Was there ever actually a 911 call? While I can't say there wasn't one, I also have lingering doubts that there was one. At 11:58 a.m. anyways. Moscow Police Department provides update on murders of U of I students, November 27, 2022. Additional information related to the investigation from Moscow Police. Currently, no suspects are in custody, and no weapon has been located. Just wanted to point out right here, on November 27, 2022, they're saying no suspects are in custody, not that no suspects exist. Pretty sure everyone was aware nobody had been arrested, so nobody was in custody for the crime. Weird thing to say. Almost like they were already picking and choosing their words because of course, they already had their suspect and weren't denying it. Just saying he wasn't in custody. On the night of the incident, officers located a dog at the residence. The dog was unharmed, turned over to animal services, and later turned over to a responsible party. Why wouldn't they take Murphy into custody for forensic testing even if there were no obvious signs of blood on him? Unless they knew he wasn't there during the crime because as this article still states to this day, they located him the night of the incident and turned him over to animal services then. Unless this isn't even Murphy they're talking about. Could they be talking about a completely different dog whose barks were picked up by the neighbor's camera? This article is from a local news source, 2 Idaho News. Again, I'd think they would have corrected it by now if needed. What time was Murphy actually found? Was he brought back to the scene after it was discovered, which is why he was clean and not taken in for testing? Was it him barking for 30 minutes outside and why he was picked up? Did MPD miss the entire crime happening at this point? Or worse? Did they already know about the crime at this point? Or something else that happened at the residence that night? Could they have prevented this somehow and that's what's being hidden? What do you think happened? I haven't had time to go through all of the new documents yet, but I did hear Payne performed some kind of bark testing outside 1122 during the investigation. Let me know in comments if you know where this info is. Is this why? Were they trying to figure out if it was Murphy outside before he was picked up? I don't have any answers, just asking for help with my many questions.
Chief, if you don't mind elaborating a bit more on those two people. Was it two people? What have those people shared about the circumstances of that night, what they saw or didn't see?
Well, I'm not going to go into what they shared that night. Obviously, that's part of our investigation. That's part of the information that we're trying to build our complete story with. So as far as that goes, we're not going to go any further into what they know and what they don't know.
How many were there?
We believe two. Well, I'm not going to go into what they shared that night. Obviously, that's part of our investigation. That's part of the information that we're trying to build our complete story with.
Of Party House. The victim's hilly, campus-adjacent neighborhood, crammed with large and small apartment buildings, plus family homes with rooms rented by students, was known as a party zone. A friend and neighbor of the victims, who said they often visited the gray, three-story home with a large balcony and barbecue and a sofa in the backyard, described it as a normal girl party house. Several residents of a large, brick apartment building next door described disruptive late-night parties with loud country music and numerous visitors coming and going through an unlocked door. Police were called to respond to complaints of loud parties at the house 3 times since August, according to reports obtained by Insider.
The evolving landscaping outside the King Roadhouse in the Idaho4 case is very bizarre, folks. When have you seen the exterior landscaping of a crime scene change this much within a 2-year period or less? This is bizarre, and you see the crime scene tape is there. So all these changes were occurring while the LE was protecting the house and investigating. Yes, folks. What is that about? You guys decide for yourself. Then we had the demolition and they had to flatten all that out. You guys decide for yourself.
Communities in the country. They lived on one of the most iconic streets for being seniors. It's kind of a well-known place. And, I obviously don't know for a fact, but I know my sisters, and I know for a fact they locked their doors. So by all means, they did everything right.
Correct.
There was a keypad on their front door. I will say, due to the, closeness of the community and due to the safeness of it, I think a lot of people had, access to that door. But yes, that door had a keypad code on it.
Per Vox, the 3-story home was accessed primarily by a secure door with a coded entry on the bottom floor, as well as by a sliding glass door on the main level, 2nd floor, of the house. The lower entry was locked, but the sliding door might have been more easily accessible. So which door is supposed to be the unlocked door that people were always coming and going through? They sure got rid of that detail quickly. Per 2 Idaho News, we're not 100% sure if the door was locked, but there was no damage to anything and the door was still open when we got there, Fry said. Since Fry said he had no idea about the front door being open at 8:30 a.m., clip coming, we have to assume he's referring to the glass slider here. Jeffrey Kernadle also questioned how the killer got inside the house since the front door locks with a number code.
I'll answer the last part there just because it's at the front end of my mind. We're not 100% sure if the door was unlocked, but there was no damage to anything and the door was still open when we got there.
A Lyft driver, Vincent Sheets, said he'd started refusing to pick up or drop off anyone in the vicinity of the house on party nights because he'd experienced incidents in which his car was hit with vomit and people threw objects while he was driving. He said he previously worked as a caterer at several University of Idaho fraternity and sorority houses and couldn't take it. The amount of drugs and alcohol in this was mind-fucking boggling, he told Insider. So I quit. Goncalves was a member of the Alpha Phi sorority, Kernadal and Mogan were members of Pi Beta Phi, and Chapin was a member of Sigma Chi. Speaking with the Idaho Tribune, a local taxi driver claims that the area where the 4 University of Idaho students were murdered is a known party spot, adding that, that's where people go to get illicit substances. I used to drive people there all of the time, it's a known party spot. Everyone knows that's where people go to get illicit substances. Do you remember the slip-up Thompson made during an interview that has long since been scrubbed? This is the news release issued immediately after his interview to correct his statements. I'll only read the relevant section at the bottom. It is dated November 30th, 2022. Moscow Homicide Update. Regarding the interview with Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, we feel his responses were messaged to support the implication that new information had been released. Specifically, generalized statements regarding the potential of targeted victims and the involvement of drugs were redefined into an affirmative answer. This no longer appears in the press releases on MPD's website, which is no doubt why and submitted copies of the original releases. Next we'll read an article that goes a little deeper into exactly what was said by Thompson. The Idaho Statesman. The Latah County Prosecutor's Office stated the suspects specifically looked at this residence and one or more of the occupants were undoubtedly targeted. We've spoken with the Latah County Prosecutor's Office and identified this as a miscommunication. Detectives don't currently know if the residents or any occupants were specifically targeted but continue to investigate. When the Idaho Statesman asked to interview Thompson, the Latah County Prosecutor's Office said all interviews must be arranged through law enforcement. The MPD said Thompson wasn't planning to do any other interviews Wednesday and potentially wouldn't do any in the future. In the Wednesday evening news release, MPD said it believed Thompson's responses had been messaged to support the implication that new information had been released. Specifically, generalized statements regarding the potential of targeted victims and the involvement of illicit substances were redefined into an affirmative answer. The department added, at this time, there is no change or new information in this case, and references otherwise would be inaccurate. We ask the public to refer to the MPD website for any updates on the investigation. MPD has repeatedly said that only vetted information that does not hinder the investigation will be released to the public. My thoughts. Does anyone remember it being said that the residence and one or more occupant was undoubtedly targeted? I remember targeted, but they didn't know if it was the house or the occupants. They knew by November 29th, yet didn't have BK's name then? Doesn't compute with what we know. Illicit substances? Time to look through this scrubbed lens. Unless we want to make more excuses for the crazy? Santa was confused, talking out of his rear. Yet they let him prosecute the case? Okay. Funny Thompson was restricted from interviews after that. That would only happen if the case could have been jeopardized by his actions. MPD stated they would only release vetted info that didn't hinder the investigation to the public. That information must have had the potential to hinder the investigation. No other reason to scrub it. Most articles discussing targeted versus non-targeted erase the illicit substance part of the original article. Look up a few articles and compare the wording to this article. Hard to believe this is about a PhD student they say was a budding serial killer. An FBI agent announced after his arrest that he thought we'd see a Ted Bundy-like character emerge. I guess they thought it would catch on better than it did. If he was, they lied immediately by saying it was targeted and everyone was safe, didn't they? In my opinion, a serial killer loose amongst 2 college towns is far from safe. If you see it differently, please feel free to explain in comments. Does any of this change what you think? Does it even matter? I can't recall another case with so many details scrubbed and kept secret by such a strict gag order. Note the date of this article's final update, January 6, 2023, which is after BK's arrest. We know it was also updated before this to erase the statement regarding the home and one or more of the occupants undoubtedly being targeted. Note the date it was originally published, December 1, 2022, which is before BK's arrest.
Go through. Is there anything that stood out in that volume of information that you received that might lead police to say it was a targeted attack? Because that's confounded a lot of us.
Right. Yes, I didn't share that same, I don't share that same opinion. Really, there's 4 people that have all been killed at one scene and 4 young college students. So all of them were stabbed and all of them were killed. So I'm not sure how that is targeted.
I mean, it certainly seemed odd to me as well. Can you tell me if there were at least signs of struggle, meaning maybe the first victim was sleeping, but the ensuing noise and confusion may have awakened the others, and they may have come to fruitlessly try to fight off this killer?
I think that's one of the things that that law enforcement is looking at. I was notified shortly after law enforcement was called to the scene, but I didn't actually go there for several hours because they're the ones who have to look for the evidence and take the pictures and videos from the scene. So I think they would have more information than I would about that.
Inside that house, how big is the scene?
It's a large house. So it's a big scene to investigate.
Multiple floors? The incident happened on multiple floors?
Well, it's a multiple floor house, yes.
But did the crime happen on multiple floors, meaning they had to do forensics and there were victims and evidence on multiple floors?
I think there's evidence on multiple floors, yes.
Were there bodies found on multiple floors in different locations, or were they all found together?
I am not authorized to release that right now.
Well, I certainly respect what you can and can't do, and I really appreciate you coming on with us tonight. This is just a horrendous situation. Kathy Mabbutt, thank you for your work and for your time.
Lauda County Coroner, Kathy Mabbutt, told KTVB that she has no way of knowing it was the same knife that killed all 4 students, but if not, it would have to be pretty similar. I must interject between these statements. They pretend science doesn't exist. As someone who spent the majority of my career practicing in the medical field, mostly in the hospital setting, and as an advanced practice nurse, aka nurse practitioner, I'm calling out the lies. I've also attended autopsies. There would absolutely be forensic transfer between some of the victims if the same knife was used to attack all 4. There wasn't time to disinfect a knife between attacks. You don't even have to have medical experience to know this. This tells me they don't want to address whether or not the same knife was used. Mabbutt could not speak to defensive wounds, and she could not say if the victims were all asleep at the time. She did say the victims most likely died in the early morning hours. So why did they claim everyone was in bed and asleep at the time? I can't specify an exact time of death because it wasn't reported until the later morning. I believe the call came in at 11:58, Mabbutt said. She said there is no way of knowing who was attacked first. She could release no further information. Again, most people are aware that scientific methods exist to determine approximate time of death when it is unknown. Days didn't pass before the victims were found. This was critical to determine in this case. Especially using established scientific methods to obtain concrete answers rather than depending on the factors subject to manipulation they depended on in this case. It would have been possible, even with the late call, had they not chosen to delay any attempts for those additional critical hours. The bodies were falling out of rigor mortis by the time Mabbutt bothered to show up on scene. Using liver temperature and math calculations, there's a chance it was still possible. Why was everything put off for hours by everyone involved? From the witnesses to the officials investigating, it seems there was a combined effort to allow enough time to pass to avoid the chance of establishing dependable, critical evidence. Actually saying the science doesn't exist to accomplish these things speaks volumes. Today reported that the Idaho murders autopsy reports offered a clearer view of the slayings. In a November 17, 2022, interview with NBC News, coroner Kathy Mabbitt claimed it would have been early in the morning, sometime after 2 a.m., but still during the night. She added that there is no medical way to determine who was attacked first. However, at the time, investigators were trying to put timelines together with text messages and other technology. Did the autopsies actually narrow down the window for time of death to include 2 a.m.? That's what this seems to suggest. Pause and read if you'd like. I just want to point out Mabbitt described the attacks early on as personal. She said there was no SA very early in the case. I'm not sure if the autopsies were even done yet. You'd be surprised the past cases this has been hidden in. Mabbitt said a lot of things that contradicted the official narrative. No wonder she was a nervous wreck when speaking. Last, just because it's on this clip, there's a mention of neighbors hearing a party at the house the night of the crime. This is mentioned a lot in early reports, before MPD stomped the possibility out due to lack of evidence. This is not the same as an actual person who was there saying there was no party. Remember how they play with words in this case. I may put more together about this later. The sororities were on probation at the University of Idaho in the weeks after the killings for health and safety violations. According to the university's Greek Life website, health and safety violations are about concerns regarding risk management, alcohol/drugs, or hazing. Traumatized and scrutinized. In Moscow, some of the victims' neighbors speculated that Mortensen might have been intoxicated at the time of the killings, and therefore did not respond appropriately to encountering a strange man in her house. But the house was known for frequent guests and noisiness, in an area known for rowdy parties. Neighbors, too, were used to late-night disturbances. Matthew Moy, 22, a neighbor and a friend of Mortensen's, defended her against criticism. She has been through one of the most traumatic things you can go through, and people are attacking her, he said. When you're in a stressful situation, you might not act how people think. At closing time on a late October weekend, Kaylee Goncalves hired a Lyft driver, Dakota Kidder, to drive her and Madison Mogan home from a local bar. They had spent their night as they also would on the night of the murders, at the Corner Club. The popular watering hole is a small, windowless haunt made of gray cylinder blocks where 20-somethings sip cocktails made from Mike's Hard Lemonade, Twisted Tea, and rum. They were nice. They were not, like sloppy drunk or anything. They were great writers, Kidder told Insider. They even tipped. A disturbing new detail. The suspect in the killings, Brian Koberger, a 28-year-old, a 6-foot-tall, 185-pound criminology student who neighbors described as friendly and talkative, was enrolled at Washington State University in nearby Pullman, Washington. Prosecutors say cell phone data shows he made the 22-mile round-trip drive from his apartment to the house where the killings took place no fewer than a dozen times before the murders. But there was no further known connections between the suspect and the victims, and accounts that have surfaced about the suspected killer since his arrest have provided no clear motive or revealed any history that would suggest a propensity to kill. Koberger's arrest on December 30th, however, triggered talk of a disturbing new detail. Where did all of this conflicting info come from suddenly? It's like they changed the script. They erased early stories and most positive information, then flooded MSM with petty negative information like sibling phone theft and a birthing hip comments. So much hardened, criminal information they had to choose from for their pre-trial character assassination. Couldn't just leave it to the court process. Why not? They've never gone after anyone this hard, much less without credible information. Think about Corsi's early information. What was initially heard? Water running. Furniture moving. Voices. Hard to find that now. Mrs. Chapin described it in a now updated, and by that, I mean scrubbed, interview. Still looking for it if anybody happens to have it saved. Was the script changed? If so, by who? More clips to review. Remember Corsi's early reporting about trace DNA being found in the bathroom where perp may have cleaned up and water being heard? Now we're hearing about noise from the bathroom in court. Pause to read. See previous video for other details.
Right outside of that home. Yeah, this is the campus apartment of Brian Kohberger. It is university housing at Washington State. That is the unit number 201G. It is on the left side here. You can see the curtains are pulled, and a Idaho State trooper is posted right outside the door. But they are executing a warrant here. This is a big part of the investigation now. I heard that they arrived here around 7 o'clock this morning. Nothing has been removed from the apartment yet, but I did speak to the neighbor who lives right across the hall. He tells me that Brian Kohberger moved in, he thinks in August, right before the last semester. They've had about maybe 2 or 3 not run-ins, but they've run into each other a few times. And he said that Brian Kohberger was very friendly every time, very talkative, and almost just a friendly neighbor. So this apartment across the hall, that neighbor says he's never had any issue with Brian Kohberger, but now he lives across a crime scene. They're executing a warrant here. This is where Brian Kohberger.
This is the face police in Moscow say murdered the 4 University of Idaho students. Now, Brian Kohberger is in custody, arrested in Pennsylvania this morning as we try and learn more about him. The 28-year-old attended Northampton Community College, where he made the dean's list at least 2 semesters, then graduated DeSales University in his home state of Pennsylvania with a master's in criminal justice. This fall, he moved to Pullman to begin his first semester at Washington State, seeking a PhD. Some of those that knew him in school describe him as professional, nice, mature.
I used to go on night runs with him because, I didn't want to go running at night by myself. So I would text him, hey, you want to go for a run? We'd go for 6-7 mile runs at night. So, when I saw who it was, I was just in, complete shock.
4 hours before and after the killings, Washington State University police and Whitman County Sheriff's deputies were posted outside the suspect's apartment because of a bloody hit and run reported at 11:40 p.m. on November 12 that sent 2 pedestrians to the hospital with serious injuries. Turner Gardner, 26, told Insider that a man had been thrown from the road and a woman lay face down screaming. It was horrifying, she said of coming upon the scene just before midnight on November 12. I heard a screech and a loud bang, another witness, Andrea McKinsey, 25, told Insider. It was scary. Within 24 hours, police had Carmen E. Fernandez in custody. The 19-year-old Kappa Delta sorority member was charged with vehicular assault and DUI, according to police and press records, but first there was a manhunt, according to local press reports. Cell phone data laid out in court documents shows Kohberger's phone at his home in the early hours of November 13. A second-story window likely gave Kohberger, who, according to neighbors and court documents, was an insomniac, a view of the scene. It was also within earshot. He left his apartment about 2:42 a.m. on November 13, according to cellular data and traffic camera footage compiled by prosecutors, his white Hyundai sedan traveling 11 miles to Moscow. Prosecutors say he then committed the grisly murders, leaving behind a knife sheath containing the DNA that would eventually lead to his arrest. By 5:30 a.m., cell tower pings showed his phone back at his home. The police were there the whole time. Jose Marcado, 19, a student who lives in a nearby apartment with a view of both Kohberger's building and the accident scene, told Insider. While authorities had no reason to believe 4 people had been murdered in the neighboring town, it's unclear if the crash had anything to do with the killings, or if 2 bloody crime scenes not far from each other was a simple coincidence. It makes you wonder if things could have been different, Faith Grossi, 19, told Insider standing in a student room with a window facing the hit-and-run scene and Kohberger's apartment. At 9 a.m., Kohberger's phone was on the move again, prosecutors said, and it returned to the scene of the murders before arriving back at his Pullman home at 9:32. Around noon, about the time Moscow police found the victims and the hunt for the killer began, Kohberger's phone pings indicate that he likely slipped out of his apartment and passed Pullman police once more. A suspect at ease, a community on edge. Koberger then took a long drive, winding through hilly wheat fields and past grain slots and red barns to the confluence of the Snake and Clearwater rivers, according to security camera footage presented by prosecutors. He shopped at an Albertsons grocery store in the town of Clarkston, Washington. His cell phone was next tracked traveling east for more than an hour toward the Bitterroot Mountains, said prosecutors. He returned seemingly unnoticed to Pullman and fell back into his school routine. In addition to his doctoral studies, Koberger worked as a teaching assistant in the university's criminology department, and had even applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department, which would eventually help nab him, according to court documents. The unsolved killings set the campus on edge, with students staying inside, canceling appointments, and even leaving town early out of fear of a killer on the loose. But Koberger appeared in a notably bright and cheery mood, according to interviews conducted by Insider. One of his students said he stopped grading after the killings, but he also attended a routine medical appointment 4 days later and was so friendly with staff members that they took notice. An arrest, but no closure. It would take the police several weeks to identify Koberger as the suspect. He was arrested at his parents' house in Pennsylvania's Poconos Mountains while visiting for the holidays, after the DNA on the knife sheath found at the crime scene was matched to his father's DNA, which authorities collected from a trash can outside his parents' Pennsylvania home. But the arrest and subsequent affidavit laying out prosecutors' theory of the crime has hardly brought closure. People here still remember where they were when the last murder in Moscow happened nearly a decade ago, in 2015, and residents from the towns nearby stood in the cold to watch Koberger enter the Loudoun County Jail on January 4th.
Tonight, we're learning how police were able to identify Brian Koberger as the suspect in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students. Law enforcement sources telling ABC News they used genetic genealogy to lead them to Koberger.
Our investigative reporter Terry Parker has done a lot of digging on this topic. And Terry, you were able to confirm through your own sources how they tracked Koberger down.
Yes, my source says it only took them a matter of days to match the Brian Koberger. Now, we've all heard of cold cases being solved using genetic genealogy. My source close to this investigation tells me this has never happened before, where police took their unknown crime scene DNA samples and immediately asked genealogists to find a suspect. Crime scene investigators scoured that Moscow, Idaho house where 4 college students were found stabbed to death in their beds. And experts tell me they likely got a lot of DNA and had to separate out the victims and other people's DNA from the killers, which was a huge undertaking.
They're going to have to analyze that, and they're going to have to go through every droplet and things like that. Because again, if the suspect cut himself...
Genealogists able to identify Brian Koberger as Idaho murder suspect within days. Genealogists then built a family tree using birth and death records, census records, and other hints until they had a whole tree of that extended family going back generations. At that point, they moved downward from great-grandparents to living people looking to see who is the right age, lives in the area, and could be a possible suspect. Sources said they narrowed the possible suspects down to Koberger, and police determined he drove a white Elantra like that seen near the crime scene. That's when the FBI started tracking him and apparently collected some discarded item with Koberger's DNA on it, which police say they've positively matched to the crime scene. That's their clincher evidence. The genealogy is just the amazing tool that got them there. This article was updated January 3, 2023, and was still posted the last time I checked. I would expect them to either update it or take it down if it was incorrect. Remember, this was from a reporter with her own source close to the investigation. Do you think the FBI would have turned over a name as a tip without doing that last step and comparing the DNA to the suspect? Or did it not matter because they'd added additional genetic information they knew would match Koberger once the SNP file got to the FBI? Also, have I missed anything proving the white sedan seen in the King Road area had anything to do with the actual crime? Or is it all dependent on Koberger driving that car? At this point, my understanding of the evidence doesn't put him in that car that night, nor near the residence any of the 12 previous times he pinged on the tower servicing the residence. We're a little town that's really freaked out and in pain, Julia Plaskowski, a University of Idaho teacher, said from outside the jail that night. This changed us. Update, January 18, 2023. This story has been updated to include the fact that Chapin was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. Correction, January 18, 2023, an earlier version of the story misstated disciplinary actions that were taken against Alpha Phi and Pi Beta Phi sororities. They were on probation for health and safety violations, not suspension. Correction, January 24, 2023, because of an editing error, an earlier version of this story misstated where a knife sheath with Brian Koberger's DNA was found. The knife sheath was found inside the home where the 4 students were killed, not in a trash can outside it. Notice it took a week to make the last correction about the knife sheath location. You'd think it would have been the first and most important correction to make. I think it's important to note that this article only disappeared once I started directing people to the original version. I'd figured out how to get around it being hidden under a different title with a sanitized version. It was being monitored. That's likely how they're hiding many of the older articles. This trash can, outside the home? Trash from nearby homes was mixed with the garbage from the murder house Tuesday morning. Moscow, Idaho, police allowed a trash can that was outside the murder scene to be collected before searching it, causing the contents to be mixed up with the neighbor's trash. Exclusive, did Idaho police bungle murder weapon search? Hazmat-suited cops are forced to dig through trash mountain after sanitation truck mixed garbage from neighbors with that from the home where 4 students were murdered. Police investigating the murders were seen in a desperate conversation with garbage men who collected trash from the home. The Tuesday morning incident also saw separate trash trucks brought in to collect the contents of another 2 bins near the house before the vehicles, accompanied by 3 cop cars, drove away in convoy. Officers investigating the murders are seen talking with sanitation workers outside of the home where the 4 students were murdered. Hazmat-suited cops were forced to search the full contents of the garbage truck at the depot just outside Moscow, Idaho. The mix-up with the trash cans is one in a series of missteps by police investigating the case. Remember Corsi's earlier reporting, because of initial police missteps and local LE's failure to timely pursue certain key evidence, there is strong doubt about having a winnable case. This was posted right before Koberger's arrest in December, see previous video. Did they try to create a winnable case with a sheath they found in a trash can outside the residence? I can understand local news stations first being given the impression something was found in the garbage search. Did MPD pick up on something like our dear Bubbly Waters did here? Is this why they were so interested in the dumpsters? Did they go looking for a weapon and find a sheath to use instead? As first reported? Yes, according to the SG text messages, which Forensic Frenzy verified as being authentic at some point. Remember him thinking this person was working with BK? What do you think he actually knows? What he's actually been told? What he actually believes? Forensic Frenzy's answer to what changed her mind was that she found out it was always a search for one person. But how could that be if they believe, or are putting word out on YouTube, that BK had this person working with him? That would mean they actually believe something like Pavarotti has put together. Because to know they're only after one person, they would have to have already caught someone else involved. They've said the other BK had an alibi, he was out on a double date according to MPD. Was back home with his roommate afterwards, I'm guessing Jordan? The one who just got out of a cult and I'm not even sure likes women? Interesting alibi for someone they tried to make appear so unstable. What do you think about all that? I don't know, I can't be the only one out here who's wondered, is he trying to ruin the state's case? Anyways, did MPD go looking for the weapon in these trash bins then see these videos later? Why did they make a point to tell the world when they got them? We would have naturally assumed they got them immediately since it was so close to the crime scene. They were doing video canvassing that Sunday. I don't remember it being immediately when they announced getting them though. Did they find a contaminated sheath? A sheath to contaminate? Those trash bins became pretty important to them a little too late, on the following Tuesday. Maybe they're really just that bad at being police. Maybe we'll never know.